Hi, I'm Char, and I'm here with my friend Laura,
Hi.
and we're going to spend the next 30 minutes sharing what we want to know, what we want to show you at the intersection of ideas and experiences. And we've realized that despite our very different backgrounds, locations, and experience, we have a lot of commonalities we didn't expect. So we thought that you might have some as well, and we'd like to share ours with you. And today, Laura, we're going to talk about commonalities in language and how it helps us build relationships or define ourselves, and how not knowing that language sometimes can be a barrier to building a relationship. So you and I have had that experience. I mean, I'm thinking about, it isn't language necessarily, but temperature changes. Every time we get together to talk about temperature, because we live in different hemispheres, my temperature is very different than yours because right now I'm starting summer and you're starting winter. And here in the US, we're using standard Fahrenheit temperature measurements, and you're using metric measurements. So even making that shift in my head, just having simple conversations about how hot it is today while I was standing out in the parking lot waiting for my lunch, and how cold you were today standing outside is different because we use different temperature vocabulary.
Yes, and we have to do imperfect calculations in our heads when we have that conversation.
Although I do find it's helping me, even though I'm a science girl, it is helping me to be more accurate in my Celsius to Fahrenheit conversions. Yeah, right. So I was thinking about this podcast that I listened to called Code Switch, about why you have to know so many nuances within your own language to like flow between relationships and roles that you're in. Like, I'm doing all this curriculum work today and I'm writing policy, and there's so many very formal policy words and terms that are unique in this setting. Yet I have to think in my head, the people who are reading these policies are not education people, and are the words that I'm using going to limit their ability to access this important information that I need them to know?
You're so right, because I was on a call today and I was listening to a consultant, and he was talking about something we're not that familiar with. And I have some understanding of what he was saying, but some other people on the call, they were, what is this? What is this language that you're using? We don't know what these concepts mean. And it occurred to me that we are so often fall into what we know about, and we don't even realize that we're not actually making ourselves understood as much as we should be, because for every one person who asks, what does that mean? There are probably 10 people who don't. They don't know, they don't ask.
Right,
But
they
we're
don't
not
know. They don't know or ask, and then they just shut down.
We're not communicating effectively. We're not bringing them into our world effectively.
No, and it's I think about language as an invitation to like join the conversation, or a door, like a wall that's going to keep somebody from entering your conversation. When you think about conversations with friends, using terms and place references in those conversations make it really difficult for someone who's new to the group, who doesn't know like the group shorthand. You don't have to talk about the entire story again. You can just say, remember pretzels, and everybody laughs because they all knew the story about pretzels, except the new person in the group who is going, what does pretzels have to do with anything, and why are we all laughing about it? So it makes me think about that as we're trying to include people in our space, like being more mindful of those kind of group shorthand references, or place references that maybe they don't have that same common experience, so they can't make that connection, and then they don't feel as included in the group that they're with.
That's so the shared history is really something that comes across in a lot of our interactions and a lot of our communications. It's not even just when we talk about something that we particularly, shared, but also just the ways in which we communicate. Like you were saying, the shorthand. The sometimes you don't need to say everything, and we forget there are people who actually won't be able to make sense of what we're trying to communicate if we don't.
Right. And how do you backfill that? So you want to be inclusive. You want people to feel like they're a part of the conversation in the group. Do you pause and do the thumbnail summary of why pretzels is such a funny story? or do you not talk about pretzels when a new person is in the group and try to like build new relationships? Like, how do you find that balance about building new shared vocabulary with a new group that you're part of, but then pulling in the kind of comfort level vocabulary and conversations that the established group already has?
So I think that it's also, if you decide to just not talk about pretzels, there's always going to be something from which the new member is excluded. But if you tell them, then they are more, it's okay, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect shared experience, but they at least get to share in your memory of it to an extent. And there isn't a closed door in the relationship anymore. So I think that is, but I mean, it's not always appropriate. And these things don't always, it's a kind of a you had to be there moment. So it doesn't always translate well into retelling, and sometimes it just makes somebody feel even more excluded. It's very difficult because I think you have to make a call. So there isn't, I think that's what's so difficult about communication in general. It's different for different people. I remember going from my previous company to the company I'm now. And for me, it was an adjustment. We're all native speakers of English. And yet the way they communicate is so different that it was quite an adjustment for me. And I'm still trying to come to terms with it a year later.
And just the terminology within the company and how they talk to each other, what level of formality they use, what are the terms for work projects, or the whole idea. Here's a term that I heard at a workshop the other day was a scrum. We use the scrum process to go through this. And I'm like, scrum process. I'm like, I know what the scrum is in the context of rugby. I know that you put a ball down and then everybody is like wrestling around until the ball comes out. So I'm like, is that how you process ideas here? And then we scrum around it until like a solution pops out the other side. Like, wow, what might that be? But then it's like, oh no, the scrum process is this like really organized board where you list all the activities that you're doing and a timeline, and like you move post-its across the timeline as you're completing the activity. I'm like, oh wait, that's far more organized and civilized than wrestling in the conference room over an idea and a solution.
A lot more civilized. I think I would be I think that wrestling in the conference room would also be quite a culture shock for me. But I mean, like, so just like the difference between, say, robust banter and, love and light.
Yes.
So that's kind of thing that I was talking about. It's so difficult because you kind of try to translate it, and you put your foot in it quite a lot because you slip into the context that you're used to, and when you're not necessarily cognizant of the new culture. Because I remember I was tired one day, we were having an after-hours meeting, and I slipped back into the robust banter, and they thought I was extremely rude, and they weren't wrong. It's just that I had come from a culture where that was kind of how we just communicated and interacted with each other. There was a lot of teasing and these people, I mean, they're lovely, don't get me wrong, they're absolutely lovely people, but they treat each other with they're a bit more gentle with one another. And it's also now, sorry, my brain is running with this. You can also see it in the general culture, because this is it's a lot more of an open, flat structure. And I think that's why it works. The flat structure, the openness, the vulnerability, and the authenticity, and also the support, because we are very gentle with one another.
Well, I think everybody is agreeing to that level of gentleness and support. So, setting that culture up and modeling the kind of language you want to use within a group. When you talk about norms, like language should be part of norm conversations. Like what level of language will we use with each other? What level of, collegial banter is going to work within our culture group? How can we be sure that everybody feels included in that? The downside of language that I think you and I have both encountered is microaggression language, where on the surface level, a comment seems innocuous, but in the context that the comment is made, it's not so innocuous. And like thinking that way too about language, like language can be very inclusive, but when you are using language to minimize someone or to exclude someone, like, oh, that's an interesting choice that you've made for your outfit today. Yes. Oh, I see that you've had 3 cookies already. At one point somebody said, wow, you can talk about football with me? Oh, wow, you're kind of like a guy. Like, or I'm kind of like a girl who likes football. How about that? I think there's a lot of language that can be very subtly exclusive.
So it can be a tool, but it can also be a weapon, and it's often a lot more hurtful. I also, there's another side to that. Not only can you be, but you can also be judged on something you've said. So I've sometimes made a throwaway comment, and people have taken it seriously and then judged me based on that. So especially if somebody's kind of looking for a certain kind of behavior in you, they add their own lens and what they're looking for, and it's a kind of confirmation bias. So you've got to be so careful what you say around some people, and that also, it comes back to the safe culture. If you're safe and people are gentle with each other and you make a misstep, there's also a lot more scope for you to not, I don't want to say come back from it, because sometimes it's really not that serious and it feels like I'm overstating, but
there's more stretch in the boundaries. You get some space.
You get a bit of leeway, and that's where I think it's so important, because let's face it, if I'm cold and hungry and tired, I'm not going to be my best self, and my communication is not going to be at its best either. I remember having an off day on the day that I was interviewed actually for the position, and I could barely string a sentence together. But the director I spoke to, she overlooked that and gave me a chance to rectify it, and I did. But I'm going to say the wrong thing from time to time, because I'm human and I need the space to dial it back.
It's really that kind of grace space. Like, I'm going to have some empathy for you. I know that this is a stressful situation, or maybe this is something new for you, or maybe there's something else going on in the background that's influencing this. And so I'm going to use language to help set a tone so that you know in this conversation you do have that kind of space. Like, it's okay, we're going to work together on this, or it's okay, I see where you're trying to go, so I'm going to ask you questions to help you frame that, because I see where your idea is, but I'm not really understanding it all the way yet. How can I be a partner with you in the conversation and adjust my language accordingly? I think that's something that effective leaders can do. Like, look at the context of the situation and who you're talking with and what you want the outcome to be, and like read that room and make adjustments in the moment with the phrases you use, the examples you're pulling out, the language that you're using, so that everyone still feels like they're coming along in the conversation.
Yes, and reading the room is so important. I've seen so many people read the room incorrectly, or just not read the room at all, and actually just in a professional context, and just totally send things down the wrong path. It's so important to be able to do that, and it's a skill that so many people actually just never develop. I remember once there was a client that somebody, an employee, did not agree with the fact that this was not at this company, at a different company, that we were doing business with them, and they suggested that we actually do work with a client that was not a competitor, but on the totally opposite side of the scale. And this client was very lucrative, and the CEO had explained why we were doing business with him, but her beliefs did not align. You've got to, of course, there's a line in the sand, but you've also got to see what is going to, you need to draw the line in the sand and say, okay, I am not happy with this. It wasn't somebody who creates biological weapons. It was just her belief system didn't align.
Right.
And she just totally alienated herself from the team that was all putting together to try and keep the lights on. So it can be difficult to come back from certain things. But I don't believe she ever came back from that. She eventually ended up leaving the company. And not because she was pushed out, just because the response she got from that, because she had stated it so strongly, she could have framed it differently or raised it at a different moment. But the response she got, I think, just made her feel completely alienated. And it wasn't like a violent or aggressive response. It was just sort of read the room,
Well, it was a response that was outside kind of the shared ideas of everyone else. And when that happens, especially if it's strongly outside it is difficult then to see how you can connect back to that group. It's like something came out of my mouth that was very different from kind of the shared ideas within this group. And sometimes it's difficult to bridge that.
Also, her belief system was quite alternative, so it didn't, yeah.
And it's hard when, belief systems drive your language choices, and common experiences drive your choices. To lighten it up a little bit, we've talked just about how common words aren't so common in pulling us together, and how like words can be appropriated and used to take on a whole different meaning than they've had in the past. Slang words that, oh wow, that's really sick. Okay, well no, it's not using virus. It's something that's really impressive. So when you take on words and then give them new meanings, and then utilize the word with the new meaning, that has an interesting effect on your group and your social conversations as well. I think, having been a teacher for 35 years, working with middle school and high school students and even elementary students, that the idea of slang and some figurative language is a way to communicate with each other, so that the people who aren't in on it don't know what you're talking about. I have to laugh at all the like how to explain text messaging to your grandmother, like what all the abbreviations mean, and what are the local slang words or phrases that in one place means something really positive and in another place can mean something completely the opposite, and how people use those slang terms to have kind of out in the open coded conversations with each other.
And how confused a second language speaker might be by those like sick. I mean, I can imagine the confusion, because I know how confused I was the first time I heard it, because I'm no longer in the know about these slang words. And I was talking to a QA specialist yesterday, and she was saying that she's trying to do QA and they speak Portuguese at home as a second language, because
what's QA, Laura?
Oh, sorry, quality assurance. And so she's a quality assurance specialist, my bad. And she was saying that people don't understand that the Portuguese she speaks at home is a second language because one of her parents is Portuguese, does not mean that she can do quality assurance for a Portuguese text that is quite technical, because she doesn't know those words. She knows she can have a conversation in Portuguese. But if she was confronted with a Portuguese person or vocabulary that is specialized, she's totally out of her depth. I mean, there are English words that, well, allegedly English words in technical texts that we don't necessarily understand. And when I'm saying technical, I don't mean, I mean industry specific kind of technical.
Right. Because they have so many possible meanings depending on the context that they're in. When working with like English learners or any like new language learner, all the research points to the words that they have, they're most likely to revert back to their native or their primary language in are words to express strong emotions, words to express like really personal beliefs and ideas, because especially the emotional words, there are so many nuanced words in a language for anger, love, fear, hatred, confusion. There's such a continuum of those words that you have access to the 64 Crayola crayon box of vocabulary in your native language to express how you're feeling. But maybe you have access to the 8-color crayon box in your new language to share those same feelings. And like how frustrating that must be when you only have a limited vocabulary that you can choose from to communicate very complex things that you're feeling or thinking.
And you need to get it right. These are things that have consequences if you get it wrong. I don't want to say I'm feeling homicidal if I'm just mildly annoyed.
Right. Like I need like degrees of anger, degrees of annoyance, degrees of sadness, and
exactly.
And I think we forget that, as an educator working with English learners, I think that's something we don't take into consideration, because the focus is on academic language and the focus is on some social language, being able to communicate within a friend group or communicate within your classroom. But the regional slang, the cultural pieces that are different depending on where you're living, all of the words that go along with that take a long time to learn, because you really need to learn them in the context that they're being used there. You can't just memorize that list of words and then use it in a context.
I think it's easier if somebody knows you're maybe not a first language speaker, because I remember being at a school where the mode of instruction was Afrikaans. Now I could speak it fluently, right? I didn't have native fluency, but not so somebody wouldn't tell, because I had family that spoke it, and so I'd grown up speaking it, and I didn't even have a strong accent. So nobody knew that it wasn't my first language. And in the very first week of school, there was initiation with high school, and one of the prefects used a word that I didn't understand. I thought I understood it, but I didn't, because it was different. It was a word I was not familiar with the alternative meaning of it. So I unwittingly said that I did not like staying up late and having fun, and I wanted to go to sleep at a reasonable hour. This is what my misunderstanding
As a high school student.
Exactly. She asked, is there anybody who doesn't like, and then she used this word, and I said me, because I misunderstood the word. And then, for example, at 9 o'clock, somebody asked me, now we were staying over at the school, it was like the end of our first week, having parties and all of that. And she asked me, do I want to go to sleep? And I looked at her in confusion, and I couldn't understand. But I had a reputation for the rest of that year, at least, for being a stick in the mud.
Right, because you misinterpreted a word that was being used.
Exactly. And it was only a year or two later that I actually cottoned on to how I had branded myself, that I realized what the word actually meant when I became more comfortable with the language in the context of teenagers. So that kind of exclusion, I excluded myself by accident, because she couldn't tell that I didn't have native fluency. Now I do. But at the time, there were a lot of little smaller moments like that as well, where I just didn't understand, and people didn't know I didn't understand. So I think that's why it's so important, actually, that I didn't tell anybody as well, because I was afraid of being excluded or feeling like that I wasn't part of the in-group.
Right.
And it actually made it worse. I was more excluded because I didn't want to be excluded.
Right. All these lessons that we're talking about, there are so many different contexts that we live in. And if we go into those contexts thinking about them as languages, the language of your family, the language of your workplace, the language of your friend circle, the language of your region, and people coming into those spaces who aren't native. You're not native to my family, you're not native to my friend group, you're a new employee in our workplace. Like, thinking about what would be, if we thought about them as English learners, like what supports would we be providing them so that they can be successful in this space? We would be intentional about explaining unique terms, or we would set up a culture where it would be okay to ask, like, hey, Laura, what is QA? Because I have no idea what you're talking about. But having that level of comfort that you could say, could you explain that to me? Or, you guys are having a lot of fun talking about the pretzel story, but could somebody just give me a quick update on what the pretzel story actually was, so that I could fit in better? I think
I would hope so. I would hope we would do that.
Because that common language and those common words are what help us be unique and interesting, but they can also be exclusionary and microaggressive too. And I like that we've taken this time today to kind of reflect on that. And I'm just thinking about my own just common words that you and I have not in common. So I used football before as an example, that I like football. In your mind, when Char says she likes football, what shape is the ball?
It's round.
Right. But in Char's mind, the shape of the ball isn't round. It's the oblong thing with pointed ends.
Like a rugby ball.
But like, unless you're the field goal kicker or the kickoff kicker, you're throwing and catching and not kicking and headbutting.
Oh
towards,
no, you're absolutely not throwing, yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely not throwing. So yeah, I think that's such a good example. And, wrapping up in the what I want to show you, like we have in our own cultural spaces very unique terms for things that we enjoy, the food we enjoy, the sports that we enjoy, the places that we like to go or drive in. Like, that's what I think makes it interesting to have friends from other places from a language perspective. As kind of an end to our conversation today. Like, I've enjoyed learning from you terms and experiences from Cape Town. And I'm trying to share with you some experiences from growing up in Ohio in the United States, like what's different and interesting, because I think learning those new words and those experiences make life and friendships a lot stronger. I don't know, what do you think?
I hope that I feel like I've had a window into your world, and I feel like I'm going to be, I like to think that I'll be a lot more aware of differences, and that I will not again say QA when I mean quality assurance. And but I've also come to understand that chili, for example, is a dish and not a bowl full of chilies. So
yes, with meat and beans in it. And depending on what part of the US it's from, the type of meat and whether it's chunked or ground makes a difference.
Okay, so I didn't know that, but I feel like I'm getting a glimpse into your world. I feel like I'm getting a different perspective, and I'm really enjoying learning about that. It's broadening my horizons and what I can think about, because language is also what informs what we can think about.
Well, and I like your idea of windows, and maybe that's something we can talk about in a later conversation.
Windows.
Why it's so important to take advantage of people who can give you windows into those new experiences and opportunities.
Yes, yes.
Well, thanks for taking time to talk through language today. I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. And we hope you really enjoyed our intersection of ideas today. I think it was interesting.
We'd love to hear from you, and I'm really looking forward to it again.